Hello, everyone. It's been a year since John and I had our latest last podcast, and so it's been a year, and I've thought of things to talk about and discuss, and I'm happy that my good friend Jon Prince has been able to take time out from his Saturday and talk to me. So hello, Jon.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So for the record, it's today, January the 7th, 2023. And so Jon and we recorded my Faith Journey podcast on November 7th, 2021. And in that podcast, I said that in the near future, I would more likely distance myself further from the LDS Church rather than go back. So today I just first wanted to tell you what followed that podcast, and uh, and then discuss some ideas. So, um, so actually, I and my family, we officially resigned from the Latter-day Saint Church on January the 2nd, 2022. So it's been just exactly about 1 year and 5 days. So my main goal or my main message, first of all, is that life is still good and life is still great. So and you could even say that life is possible outside of the LDS Church, believe it or not. And so Jon actually has been out of the church for 7 years now. So you would you say, Jon, that life outside the LDS Church is possible?
Yeah, it's kind of like you. There's a lot of anxiety. I think you may go into this more. There's some anxiety about what life would look like because you don't have that model, and you're sort of you have a lot of fear around being outside of the church. And I think that you discover that, yeah, for the most part, life is fantastic. There's still challenges. Everybody still has to get up and put their pants on one leg at a time, like all this, So in many ways, life just kind of goes on. And the things that bring you joy, some of them are very similar, and sometimes there's some new things and some new perspectives. So yeah, yeah, I would recommend a faith transition, faith crisis for anybody. Well, I mean, I say that a little facetiously, but yeah, it's a fantastic experience in many ways. Definitely, growing your perspective and getting a chance to try a different way of life.
Yeah, for sure. In Estonia, they have this famous saying from one of our earlier prime ministers or someone who said that never let a good crisis go to waste. So I guess it applies to faith crises also. So, but just maybe if you're wondering why am I doing this, I'm not a podcaster by profession. So why do this kind of a podcast? So first of all, like my point is definitely not to irritate believing LDS members. But I've had this experience now for the last 2 years or so, or maybe even more, to have been like public about my faith transition, and that's why and during the course of it, a number of people whom I used to know as believing Latter-day Saints have come out to me privately as no longer believing. Some have publicly and officially left the church, but others are still involved as more or less participating Latter-day Saints, or they at least have to remain. They feel that they at least have to remain members of record, even though, for example, they don't believe and they don't attend. So and So I know, as far as Latter-day Saints go, I know people from like three main groups. First are the members in Estonia. Second is like the missionaries from the United States who have served here, and third are missionaries and people whom I served in Canada. So as there are many who are contemplating leaving the LDS Church, I just want to serve as like a case study and give my ideas, and maybe those who are contemplating leaving, then they can kind of consider these things and like be a resource for them, basically, to make up their minds and make decisions in their life. Yeah, but as far as like believing Latter-day Saints go, they're also welcome to listen. I think this might just provide food for thought for them and help them better understand someone who has left the church, or like someone who doubts the church or something. I think it will be a resource for them also. Right. So maybe just to kind of uh, round up my own story since I left since we did the last podcast. I think I'll just really quickly just kind of summarize the steps that I took after our podcast in November 2021. But so even to go a few steps back, and so what were the more concrete steps that I took that eventually led me to leave the LDS Church? So I would say that in hindsight, of course, it was a process that took years from becoming a, let's say, like a true literal believer, then becoming just more open, more liberal, more interested in other people's and different people's experiences. But I would say that once I stopped paying tithing, as kind of a conscientious objector, I realized making that decision that I could no longer be a legitimate member. Uh, and like once you're no longer temple worthy, you are immediately like a second class citizen in the church. You are being considered the project. You're no longer like a legit resource. You're now the project that others have to work with to put you right, again. Uh, and when I publicly declared my lack of belief in certain tenets, that was during the COVID time, when there was no uh, Sunday meetings. Then I did it on Facebook. Then I immediately also received strong public pushback from members who commented on my Facebook messages. And when I pushed back, and started to present arguments to validate my claims and my doubts, then I was pretty much immediately shunned. People no longer talk to you. They don't react to anything that maybe is not the party line, so to speak. And so LDS community, it is very much based on literal faith claims. So since the end of 2020, our family, we were inactive in the church, and by beginning of 2021, we, uh, uh, like me, myself, and I think also my wife, we completely lost faith in the LDS Church, and actually during 2021, we gradually stopped identifying as Latter-day Saints. So I was actually already in the beginning of 2021, I was ready to resign, but I did not want to do it by myself without the family. But I did not want to push others or push my wife. I wanted, the church was not in our life. And so there was no need to do anything in a hurry.
So maybe it's obvious, but what does that really mean when you say that you stopped identifying as a Latter-day Saint? Like, what does that feel like, or what were the? I mean, yeah, like how does that work even?
Yeah,
Especially,
so
maybe to somebody who's never gone through this type of thing, what does that even feel like? Because it's an interesting um, concept, I think.
yeah, so I would say that for me, that was the phase in my faith transition when I no longer cared, or like it was no longer. Yeah, I mean, I stopped uh, worrying about. Obviously, I had long before that stopped believing, and then I stopped attending. But then also due to COVID, this community. Uh, uh, like this community aspect also vanished, because you no longer, I mean, you could still get together via those video meetings and video conference, but I didn't do that for very long, and when we stopped practicing the LDS uh, these family habits, like family prayers and family scripture studies and things. So, and I was intellectually not interested, like I mean, I am somewhat still intellectually interested in Mormonism, but only intellectually. I was no longer, like uh, eager to learn what the prophets have to say at general conference or something like that. Like you no longer care, because you're like, okay, this, I was in Mormonism, I was in the bubble. Now this bubble is like just one of those domains or bubbles that is not part of me, like it's just kind of in the past. And so if it no longer has any bearing on your life, then that's how you stop identifying. That's my experience. So maybe it's different for you because you live among Latter-day Saints and it's more in your face, maybe.
Yeah, and then I think I have more probably family and friends who are still LDS, and you were a convert to the faith, and then I was raised in the faith. So there's a part of it that's very. So I identify with what you said about, because I think that I went through a similar phase also, but I think am still wrestling with like what to do with that residual aspect of the culture and the family and the relationships, because there's so, and also that, like, it's, I've only ever swum in those waters, and so it's like trying to decide like what is me and what is the LDS faith. But there's probably enough there for a whole separate discussion. But yeah, so slightly different experience, because I'm still wrestling with that, like the cultural attachment, like how attached do I want to be to that culture, and if I detach myself completely, what does that mean? I mean, like, that's, you really can't do that. That's like almost dissociating from your entire life. So it's like some sort of equilibrium and balance that I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. uh Yeah, and so in that sense, I totally understand. Like people who are born into the church, or they have a different relationship with the church. Even if you no longer believe, even if you have left the church, have resigned from the church, especially if you are in Utah, like it's all around you. So it is different, and so I was just gonna joke that like I grew up non-religious, then I was religious, and then I went back to being non-religious. But in New Testament it says like I'm the dog who returned to my vomit. So so it's the New Testament is not very fond of apostates who go back. So,
Yeah, that's funny. I do identify there. There's an aspect of it, I think, because when you're growing up, there are certainly like many phases where you really don't believe in the LDS message, or you're sort of trying to force it onto yourself or into yourself, and And so I do identify with that aspect of there's to some sense a returning to a state of, it's like, well, that, I kind of know what it's like to not believe in the LDS faith because I did do that for some time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think also just give me a second. I'm gonna have to clear. Okay, I'm back. So just yesterday I listened to a Mormon Stories episode about with an English sociology professor who studies religiosity, and he himself, well, I think he's like 40 or something, 40 years old, and he was brought up non-religious and is now Catholic actually. So, but in any case, what he talked about is that Latter-day Saints, we are not used to the idea that you identify as a member of a certain religion without the church having really any meaningful part in your life. Like Lutherans, for example, when I say I was brought up non-religious, I was actually Lutheran. I was christened as Lutheran, but in my first 20 years of life, I think I went to the Lutheran church like 2 times or 3 times. But the Lutheran church did not miss me. So it's an altogether different thing. And this English professor also said that when Latter-day Saints are worried that from their youth, like 50% are falling away, then if you were like an Episcopalian or an Anglican in England, then if 1% of their youth attended church, or let's say a youth came to church, they would be surprised and they would be like, wow, like a youth came to church. What's going on? Like they don't normally start attending until they're like 70 or something, well, maybe not that late, but like it's a totally different view of like how people live their religion, and they don't necessarily they're not active in attending church, but they still identify as one denomination or another. So I think that the LDS Church will just go through this similar type of transition over the coming decades. I don't know what you think about that. It's kind of
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of it feels like an inevitable trajectory. What is it? The routinization of authority. There's like people have studied these trajectories in various organizations, and I think that ultimately, that it's you have to really fight against that, but I'm not even sure if an organization can. I think it seems like schisms or smaller groups are the only way to really have groups that have the same type of totalism. And so you're seeing the LDS faith experience sort of the the softening of its totalistic stance over time, little by little. And most of us who are out think that's probably a good thing. The more right-wing fundamentalists, they view that as the church sort of falling away or becoming weaker over time, giving in to the liberal world or something like that.
yeah. So, and I think when I've thought about it, I think it will go hand in hand, and this may take a long time, of course. I'm not, and it may not be the same trajectory, but I think this may lead to the LDS Church adopting like a similar structure that Protestant churches and the Catholic churches have, is that where they have paid clergy. because LDS Church now has partially paid clergy, but it's only, let's say, the headquarters and general authorities and professionals in the church. The church already pays for certain professional services to its members, and so I think that the church, as it's aggressively building up its nest egg, the Ensign Peak advisors, the money starts only growing. I think eventually the church will be, let's say, fiscally viable to make this transition, and this transition may take a long time, but it may be gradual. But I would not be surprised if, let's say, within the next half a century, the LDS Church will move more towards this kind of paid clergy type system. It might
Yeah,
not, but it might.
that seems possible. It's also interesting that the way that it's happened already, and probably the way it would happen, is it's sort of like the pay is smuggled in as it's not as sort of a stipend, as living, as a living stipend, and so it's not really, it's not really considered a salary or an income. It's just sort of living compensation. It's how like mission presidents are compensated, and so a mission president doesn't really lose any money or income while they're doing it, because they're fair, sort of like compensated to some level. And so you could imagine a similar type of model where you can still argue semantics and say, well, it's not really a salary, so it's not really paid clergy, and it will probably be under some kind of model like that if we were to predict. But I think you're probably the same with me, is like, you never know. The world is surprising, people are surprising, organizations can sometimes be surprising, and
Yeah.
so who knows, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I have a lot of thoughts about the future of religion and LDS in particular, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get to it later. But so I think the last thing I mentioned about my own faith transition was that I was ready to resign, but I did not want to rush it. And actually also for a while there, because I was still a member and a former, let's say, top leader in the church in Estonia, and a public apostate, I was actually hoping that I would get the disciplinary council and get excommunicated. And yeah, you might think like, so why, like why would a person want something like that? But of course, from my perspective, I think it would have given me an opportunity and a platform to discuss the difficult topics with local leaders, and also like I was not let's say I wasn't bothered by the tone or the threats of losing my eternal blessings or privileges or whatever. It's by then it was already like fantasy world for me. I wasn't worried about the the emotional pressure that would be put on you during the disciplinary council. But the letter never came. I was never invited. I guess the local leaders just decided to avoid me like the plague, and so by the end of 2021, I just came to the conclusion that I personally no longer wanted the LDS Church to be able to count me as a member, and because one of those, let's say, like one of those prevailing ethoses in the LDS Church is that, like, can't you see how we are the God's true church, because we're growing so fast and we have so many million members, and now there's 16 million, and but I already knew from my time as a believing Latter-day Saint and leader in the church that the numbers that are reported as total membership are anyway grossly inflated. And so I just wanted to make a statement that I do not want the LDS Church to be able to count me, because I'm not a member. I mean, I don't consider myself a member. I don't consider the church to be what it claims to be, and so I felt like to be authentic, and also I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that I am no longer a Latter-day Saint, because I was publicly critical, and so I did not want there to be any question about who I am, so. So, at the end of 2021, so about a year ago, then I expressed to my wife that I will, in any case, leave the church, but she can remain a member, and the kids can remain members if they please. But so we discussed it, and at that time, she, after a while, also decided that like she also does not want to continue, and so we talked to the children, and then we discussed, decided that we will all just apply for resignation. So that
In many
was it.
ways, that's kind of nice that you were able to do that as a family, do that together. So
Yeah, absolutely. So it will leave no loose ends in any, and one of the reasons I wanted to um, make sure that the children will also resign is that you know how the LDS Church is, like, if you're on the on the on the membership roll on record, then they will continue to pester. They will continue to come after you and come after your kids, and so I just wanted to make sure that it's official, and so to have a clean break. Now, I'm not, of course, going to, um, let's say, be an obstacle if my children decide to go back to the LDS Church when they grow up, or adopt another religion. I mean, I will probably discuss it with them and explain to them the implications, and introduce to them other competitive models, to view the world. But I do realize that, especially for young people that are, just young adults and young people growing up, they want to find identity and meaning and purpose, and comfort, and some kind of coping mechanism. I totally understand why, church, I mean, religion is attractive, especially when you're young. So no problem whatsoever. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I posted publicly about my resignation, and then obviously again, those believing members who still uh, let's say, viewed my posts and responded. Of course, it was mostly negative, but it is what it is. So you just have to be, I guess, ready for that. So
what, if I can ask, what was, or were there any feedback that you received that was maybe the most painful or the most difficult to hear at the time?
not really, because I was already used to it by then. Because I had been a public apostate for longer than that, but just some, like the comments that are most ignorant are the ones that say, well, Satan got another one, or another valiant one fell, or and they post it, on your page, on your Facebook page. So, like, it is what it is. It's like
Yeah,
it's
I
their
mean,
worldview.
yeah. It's, I mean, and that's kind of front and center of that worldview for many Latter-day Saints, which is like a strong binary. You're either doing it or you are not doing it, and if you're not doing it, then
Yeah.
there's at least some influence from Satan that has to be at play, right? Because else, what's your problem? Like,
Yeah.
or it's just massive amounts of pride, pride on some level, or unresolved sin. There has to be something
Yeah,
to
for sure.
explain that. But it couldn't be that you sort of felt like there was a better model for explaining the world. That's kind of like the unacceptable answer, or that it was a path of integrity for you and of maybe spiritual development. That's not contemplated for some members. And I think, as we've talked about, like the LDS Church, probably it's getting better. And as a culture, there's some people who are more understanding and more willing to kind of view things with an open mind and make space for different ways of approaching and viewing the world. And just I guess even the possibility that this might be a productive route for a person, or helpful, or at least on parity with other things they could be doing.
Of course, but now I have not listened to the General Conference for 3 or 4 years now, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I venture to say that if there are members who take the approach that you just described, to be more open and understanding, then they would actually go against the official rhetoric of the church and what you hear from church leaders, that um, that basically apostates, they let the world get the best of them, or they lost the spirit, or Satan got a hold of them, or whatever. I think that's still the official and predominant rhetoric in the church. So I would say that if you are more open and understanding, then uh, that's not the public official rhetoric of the church. Am I wrong? Too harsh?
No, I think you're right. It seems like there are a few statements here and there that are a little bit more open and generous, and that people will sometimes apply to these types of situations. So so I do. This is a topic that I track. So I track like statements of LDS leadership and how they view either people struggling with their faith, but especially who have left. And there's definitely like a trajectory towards like a softening stance, and that ratio, like there are more statements that are softer. It still is a ratio, meaning there are definitely still statements which either directly, and mostly it's by implication. I think most of the statements now imply what we're talking about, but they're built upon a foundation where these things were said explicitly. So an example might be in the past, Carlos Acey in 1981, it's faith killers should be shunned. And he, kind of defines exactly what a faith killer is. And most former members would easily qualify if we just talk about what we think about a particular topic. Whereas now, so in like 2019, President Nelson said, it's more implied. So it says he's talking about truth. Some things are simply true. The arbiter of truth is God, not your favorite social media news feed, not Google, and certainly not those who are disaffected from the church. So it's sort of like he didn't say that people who have left are bereft of truth, but it is strongly implied when you add the, certainly not these people. So like that, like how could, these people are definitely not in possession of truth on any level. So things like that, and kind of the different analogies, like is it Corbridge and the stay in the boat kind of analogy and things like that. And when they talk about why and how to stay in the boat, the implication is always that though it's implied that those who did not failed to do those things. So it's like it's very often by implication that that those who leave are kind of considered of lacking in integrity, prideful, wanting to sin, failing to do like spiritual maintenance activities, like they just failed to pray enough and read their scriptures enough. There's like kind of this whole pattern, this whole lifestyle. Like in some ways they were falling short.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's how it is. And I also when I posted on Facebook about my resignation, I also let's say included a lengthy blog post in Estonian where I wrote at length about the reasons why I was leaving the church, and was fairly straightforward about the problems in LDS, um, let's say history, doctrine, so on and so forth. And I think the funniest response to it on my Facebook page was something like, and it's from a man who is over 80 years old, over 80 years old, and just a really sweet man, and very religious, and his comment was something like, I sense that there is some allergy or something that has overtaken your mind or something. Like I think I have a remedy for that. I have these herbs that you can take, like they really cannot fathom that someone has just let's say studied and contemplated and found an alternative epistemology or worldview or paradigm. It has to be some kind of illness or some kind of some kind of problem that cannot be legitimate that you would leave the church. So you have to be ready for that. All I'm saying is that just have to be ready for that. And but like we've discussed this before, is that in your 20 in like 20, at 20 years old when I joined the church, it's you trust the authorities more, and the religious worldview actually is based on authority. Like there are these there is this God-given system or procedure or process, and there are people with authority, and the scriptures have authority, and the prophets have authority, and authority is what determines what is true, and so the scientific worldview or empiricism, or let's say observation, data, um, these kinds of things, um, evidences, to make those things the main authority, rather than a person, God, prophet, whatnot. It's really antithetical to religion. So it's two completely different approaches to uh, finding out what is right and what is true. And so yeah, that's why I would say it's a really big switch you have to make, and it mostly it is very it's tends to be gradual and takes years and so forth. And that's why I understand why those who are believing Latter-day Saints, or religious people in general, it's really hard for them to understand, and that they have their explanations, and they have their theories and things. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good way of framing it. In many ways, it's sort of like which authority are you thinking about or leaning on, and that's the process, the point at which you're even able to contemplate leaving or changing, thinking in a different way, is in part because you've been able to shift some of that, at least some of that authority, to other figures, such as your own. I mean, a lot of it is towards your own thinking and study, and then sometimes leaning on science or other other ways of approaching the world. The and I There's a statement this is 1913 from a First Presidency statement, and it basically, I think, captures the LDS perspective on this. And it says, when inspiration conveys something out of harmony with the accepted revelations of the church or contrary to the decisions of its constituted authorities, Latter-day Saints may know that it is not of God, no matter how plausible it may appear. And so it's just a very strong, and that's also, it's an official statement. It's also, I would say, culturally, they're just, if it's running amok or aground of the official stance, it just can't be right. Then like something's wrong, something's off.
Yeah, exactly. So there are those axioms and dogmas in Latter-day Saint worldview, or let's just be real, just in the religious worldview in general, that there's no there's no going past those. Like God has to be the authority, and our group has to be right, or else what are we doing here? So okay, so I think I want to now maybe talk about my experience out of the church, or how it has been, and maybe just kind of a couple of insights that I've gained. Um, and again, it's only been a year, like 1 year. So you've had your experience a little longer, 7 years. So please feel free to give your perspective. And I would like to start just by saying, or just observing that that I've realized that it may take time to overcome the church, so to speak. Like I was conditioned for a very long time to be Mormon. I was in it for 20 years, a little more, and so it's going to be gradual to overcome. But as time passes, you're overcoming it more and more. And so at first you have this kind of residual anxiety about not going to church. I remember on Sunday looking at the clock and thinking, oh, now it's the time when they're singing the opening song, or they're going to pass the sacrament now. And I used to wear the white shirt and tie, and you think back, uh, but so like the church experience was so total, and it's just the shift is so sharp that those things will come back, and you will think about those things very much. But then, gradually they start to wear off, and it will come, like, let's say, uh, deconverting from Mormonism is also like a set of spiritual experiences, uh, quote unquote, where you live your life, you experience life, you think about thoughts, you contemplate, and then, let's say, all of a sudden, out of the blue, you have some kind of realization, like, okay, this no longer, I don't have to worry about it no longer. It no longer bothers me. I think I remember that one Sunday when we had resigned, we hadn't been going to church, and I just remember having my Sunday morning coffee, looking out the window, enjoying the scenery, enjoying the view, and thinking, just reading some kind of science magazine or book or whatever, and just thinking, boy, am I happy, and glad now that I no longer have to experience this Sunday hassle. I can actually rest on Sunday, and all of a sudden this anxiety about not going was gone. And like, you have these experiences and these moments where all of a sudden you put everything to pass, past, it's in the past, it's gone, this life is now gone, and you can move on freely and anxiety free.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting, or from what I hear you saying, which I've also experienced, is that yes, there's an aspect of, because I think anxiety is a huge part of life in the LDS faith. even if it's, I would say, in its most healthiest form, there's still sort of like an ever present worry. It's like, what's your next meeting? What's the next thing you need to prepare for? Have you done your home teaching? Have you done your scripture study and prayers for the day? So there's just so much regimen and things to kind of worry about. And then there's also like, what have I sinned? If I've been doing, how do I need to repent? And, there's a whole lot of burden. And as that kind of slips away and doesn't occupy your time, then there is, I think, generally what's replaced with it is greater peace. And then also the chance to sort of like just ruminate and explore different interesting paths that you didn't really feel like you could access previously. I was just thinking, like, one of the things that's fun is, I like exploring like different movies and things like that. My wife and I like to watch most of the best pictures that are nominated, for better or for worse. That's a lot of fun, and that was never really a hobby or something that we felt comfortable doing. And most of them are rated R. I know that's not as big of a deal I think in Europe as in the US, but still, just things like that, or just exploring other ways to find fulfillment. Like lately, I've been doing a lot of climbing at the climbing gym, and that is really satisfying, really fun, and is kind of an alternate activity that I don't think I would have had time for if I were a member of the church. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll probably later comment more about that, like how do we choose our activities, how we live a good life after we leave the church, and so forth. So it's we'll talk about that too. So the second insight that I want to give is that just kind of to encourage those that are transitioning out or considering transitioning out, is that there are many resources out there that help you make the transition, and including online ex-Mormon communities, for example. So when you are in the church, you are used to being a part of a tight-knit community, and you feel like you have strong bonds and strong friendships. But of course, lo and behold, as soon as you say something that is not the party line, or you express your doubt, like I felt, I experienced, you lose this community very quickly. Like they're just like that, they're gone. So you might still have a need for community, and so the internet has really now enables, even if you're let's say you live in a small place, small town or something, um, or whatnot, you can be part of an online community. And there's so many, actually, and there are various uh, ex-Mormon online communities, and in Utah, where you live, they even have these, let's say, physical activities and physical get-togethers. So then often they revolve around like a podcast or a Facebook group, like Mormon Stories, or there are others. There are these podcasts and these online communities for former Christians, former Mormons, former Jehovah's Witnesses, former Muslims, all kinds, and I have actually peeked into all of them just to see how they are, and the stories are all very similar, and it's the dynamic, the transition process is very similar, and the religions are very similar, and so yeah. So, and I would definitely encourage people to participate in those, and be proactive. Like you will find friends. Like I remember I reached out to you myself, right? Because I had seen just like like a Facebook, like a comment on Facebook that you had made, and I just felt like reaching out. And now, we know each other for 2 years. We've had many fulfilling discussions, and so you can find new friends and you can find new community. You're not going to be left alone in the dreary world, you don't have to worry about, um, and if those people, if the believing Latter-day Saint community is not able to contain you when you no longer believe, then I mean, I guess they're not inclusive enough. So you just have to find new people. So I don't know what your experience about that.
Yeah, it is really wonderful. I mean, the internet is kind of maybe one of the most important um, technological innovations and social innovations of the modern era, or any era for that matter. It's really and this it's a I'm not even sure that the LDS Church would have experienced the type of threats to its membership numbers if the internet hadn't been there. There's a model about this where with the invention of the printing press, that all the access to information and things like that, it created the foundation for lots of schisms within the church in Europe at that time. And the prediction is, like, academics have studied this, is that similar types of schisms would happen because of the internet, because of the sort of democratization of both information and the ability to socialize. And so you would get different communities popping up, and also the ability to access and kind of compete with and understand information in new ways. And all of that created different pockets of community and intellectual thought. And so you can argue that a lot of people leaving the church has been a manifestation of this evolution. And it's not to say that everything is wonderful with, like, the internet or social media. I think there's lots of potential downfalls. There's problems with echo chambers. There's problems with courtesy and just bullying. There's all sorts of issues in those spaces. But yeah, I also agree. For me, the online community around, there's so much variety that it's not very hard to find kind of the platform and the angle that is most that feels at home to you, and where you can feel like you can make a contribution. And I think it's been fun to, I mean, like, some of these communities, you go into them and you spend some time in them and try to understand different perspectives and have some discussions, and then at some point you may outgrow them, and you're like, okay, I've spent my time here. It doesn't really reflect. I'm not gaining a whole lot. I don't feel like I'm able to add a whole lot, and you sort of move along. And so I think that's also kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like when throughout my transition period, I have been participating in various online communities, and that just kind of reflected what I was where I was at, at the moment at that time. And so when I was ready to, let's say, when I realized that this does not exactly reflect the reality, then I just wanted to move on. And when you adopt like this kind of a scientific worldview, or this understand the scientific model, then you are in less threat to get stuck to some specific guru or something. It's only when you are, let's say, you have this um, personal authority-based worldview that you tend to get stuck with certain gurus. But when you understand that it's not about the person, it's about the ideas, and the person might be very smart and very insightful in like 99% of the things that they say. but then, there's one thing, there's maybe 1% or 10% that you're not really sure about. Then, you don't have to be a disciple. You just say, well, like, this doesn't make sense to me, I don't understand it, or it's just not my style. I don't want to do this, I don't want to live this way. It's just, you have this freedom uh, to follow and to choose, to experiment.
Yeah, the freedom and the burden, to some extent, to yeah, explore those paths. But yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that as a third point, or third kind of like a bundle of things I want to discuss, as an insight, is like why I feel it is better now, why life is better now after I left. And so I have brought out some points here, and I want to just kind of list them and discuss them. So maybe first of all, and the main one, is that you have freedom. You have like real freedom. They say I think in the Bible it says the truth will set you free. I agree with the statement, the truth will set you free. The problem is you don't find that the truth in the Bible. You don't find the truth in the religion. So, but when you leave religion, you have more freedom to live authentically and to pursue knowledge without boundaries and dogmas. The main problem is the dogmas, um, something set in stone. But what if the evidence? What if our uh, best evidence-based theories go against your dogmas? You have to choose between the dogma and the best theory. So I would say that uh, freedom to learn, freedom to pursue truth. You're not tethered to any dogmas. I highly recommend. There are many awesome. I mean, there are too many to really name, but if I'll just bring out a few, I'll put it in the comment. I mean, in the information section also. If you want to listen to some good podcasts and YouTube channels like Mormon Stories, Mythvision, Crecganford. Crecganford is an English professor who uh, talks about ancient myths and like the very earliest religions. It's really cool. Um, if you want to know more about just kind of rational thinking, there's Genetically Modified Skeptic, Cosmic Skeptic, Rationality Rules, so on and so forth. If you want to know more about science, there's Startalk. There are many, like there are very many science channels. You'll find them all. So yeah, any comments?
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in as well. So it's just been interesting to think about the ratio of content I consume related to like the LDS church. And of course, when you're going through your faith transition and near to it, at least for me, it was a lot of LDS content. And now that ratio has shifted a fair amount, and probably, there's but yeah, I agree. Things like Science Versus or Radio Lab or 99 PI or the Scene on Radio podcast series on men. Is really fantastic, sort of like looking at toxic masculinity and things like this. But then I still enjoy. I really like the spaces still where it's open-minded but believing Latter-day Saints in productive dialogue with respectful and courteous critics or secular academics. I think those are tremendously productive, or at least to me, they're super interesting still. So like Gospel Tangents is one of those podcasts where
Yeah,
Rick Bennett does a fantastic job
yeah,
of bringing on academics from both different perspectives and just kind of thoughtfully engaging with them. And then like Listen, Learn, and Love is another one where like Richard Osler is exploring different ways of trying to be more inclusive, but within an LDS framework. And I think those types of projects are super interesting. I also like the Bill Reel and RFM. They do this Mormonism Live,
Mormonism Live, yeah.
yeah, sort of show. And I think they, by and large, they do.
They're more edgy. They're a bit more edgy.
Yeah, they are a bit more edgy in many ways. I mean, there's to some extent they're trying to do it, it's sort of like an entertainment thing,
Yeah.
but they it feels like they also, they try to do a good job of digging into the data itself, and occasionally they they will sort of like conclude like with against the prevailing sort of like ex-Mormon dogma. And that to me is a sign that at least there's some, sort of like genuine intellectual integrity that they will occasionally, find support against what the prevailing sort of like ex-Mormon viewpoint might have been. And so I find that encouraging. But yeah, so lots of fun things in the ex-Mormon
yeah,
space.
and also very influential for me for a while was John Larson and his old podcast. I can't remember what it's called anymore.
Mormon
Something
Expressions.
discussions.
I think it was Mormon Expressions.
Sorry, Mormon Expression. Yeah, Mormon
I could be wrong.
Expression.
That's what
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah, maybe that's
that
wrong.
that that
But
one is also very epic. Definitely
but
suggest.
also very very kind of edgy in certain ways. Like his tone is can be very bombastic. He's extremely thoughtful, but he also is very unapologetic about
Yeah, yeah,
many of his perspectives. But super interesting to listen to. Very very
yeah,
thoughtful. I think that's the whole point of this is that when you can sort of eclectically choose what you want to listen to and the ideas that you actually subscribe to, then there's more freedom to sort of just go out, listen to different voices. There's no obligation to agree with everything anybody says. You're sort of taking it in at least somewhat critically, and hopefully getting some balanced perspective in other places too, so that you can come to informed
yeah.
conclusions.
Absolutely. And another very informative and very enlightening genre for me has been to view the debates between, let's say, Christians and atheists and so forth. Super enlightening. They go to the very, the very heart of the issues, and so definitely would suggest to view the debates also. Right. So freedom to study, freedom to live authentically. Another reason why life is better now is there's less anxiety and stress over what, the all-knowing eye sees or wants from you, and what the church expects, and how you look to, and how you look the other to, like how the other valiant ones, or the other let's say active Latter-day Saints view you, like you don't have this kind of stress about always having to be what's a good expression, like Sunday best, always upright, and so you just don't have the anxiety um, about always having to be, someone else's just idea of what's appropriate and what's not. So I would say that has really reduced any anxiety and stress. So yeah, I mean, um, did you have? I think you even already mentioned that you had pretty much the same experience, that the anxiety factor really goes away.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, much of my childhood was spent worrying about, whether the second coming was about to happen and everybody was going to start burning, or massive destruction, or was I, had I committed some sin and I wouldn't be worthy and I would, die and that would be it. And like a fair amount of, your focus and perspective is thinking about that, is worrying about that type of thing. And so, I mean, I think that that was less as an adult. Eventually, I think, I developed more of a personal theology that was a little bit more, and as many people do, where it's just more focused on the atonement, and that as long as you're sort of kind of facing in the right direction, that you don't really have that much to worry about. But nonetheless, I think that the contrast, there's still, even then, there's much less anxiety in that fashion, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So another reason why life is better now is that there's a lot more time and energy for people and activities that really matter. I mean, yes, you could say that when you are religious or Latter-day Saint, that you're doing God's work and you're helping others and serving the Lord, and occasionally you do something that is really worthwhile. But in my estimation, as the years went on, I spent a huge amount of hours just basically making sure the organization is alive, like you're just keeping the organization alive. You're spending a huge amount of hours, traveling as a leader, or just doing the church's financial records for free. Like you don't get compensated. The compensation comes in the celestial kingdom, but in fact, you feel like okay, well, yeah, I mean, it does. If you frame it to yourself this way, then I guess you are able to do this. People are very flexible, and people are quite capable. But if you no longer like believe in those things, and then it's just a huge waste of time and energy. And when you leave the church, resign the church, you there's more time, there's more energy. So
Yeah. I guess as I think about it now, for me, I just see it kind of apples to apples. It's just different types of, to some extent. I mean, there are certain things that certainly matter, and there are other things that are just, that are of less significance. But it at the very least, I don't think we're doing anything that matters any more or less. I mean, like a Latter-day Saint is, that may spend 2 hours in the temple going through that particular ritual. There are aspects of that that are very fulfilling and wonderful. I may spend a couple of hours sitting down with my kids and watching, a Netflix anime or something like that together, and we talk about it and have discussions about it, and like which one of those matters more or less. Like especially if you take away the cosmic mattering of it, it's difficult to say which of those is superior to one another. But certainly, at least at this phase in life, it doesn't. It's incoherent to think about those other things mattering quite in the same way, because we're focused on something else. I do. It does feel like more things that I'm able to do now, I can focus on things that are current conversations, current topics, the things that actually matter in 2023. There's a sense that, like, when you're in the church, you're always focusing back on the writings and thoughts of the early LDS brethren and things like this. And so it's, in some ways, it's nice to be able to focus on, it's like, well, what do scientists and philosophers and just friends and family, what do they think right now in 2023? And versus sort of this, always like, looking back at a lost time. It's like, oh, well, it's, if only we could get back to our original, spiritual roots. Whereas there's an immediacy now of like, no, this is life as it is. It matters in the moment. And it's a very weird place with all these fantastic currents and threads that have all arrived at this point, but it is, we are at this point of making meaning right now. Like, we're the ones making the meaning, and that's very, very exciting.
For sure, for sure. And we'll talk about meaning later even more. But yeah, so of course I have to say that my perspective is a little bit unique. Like throughout pretty much all my 20 years in the church, I was a local leader, and so I had very high time demands on me. Like what they say about the church in the mission field is there's this the same 10 people syndrome. Like you're released from one leadership calling, you go to the next one. So throughout my time in the church, I think I served in all of these local leadership callings, and so yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time for the church, and so and then now I have a lot more time and energy for other things. And I think, like, when you compare, yeah, like when you say, okay, this is my religious ritual, but when I'm doing something worthwhile with the children, this actually matters. This is me doing something that is, most important, and what is life really all about. Like there's just carrying life forward and procreating. Like this is what we evolutionarily, this is what all life does. And so, I mean, it's I went to the movies today with my two older kids to see Avatar, the new Avatar movie, and yeah, it was very, very interesting, and so definitely enjoyed it a lot. And it's quality time with the kids. Back in the day, back when I was in the church, it would have been there would have been a lot less time for things like these. So.
Yeah, for sure.
So another reason why the church, I mean, why the life is better now than it was in the church is that I have more money now, and because I'm not giving it away to the church, in the form of tithing and other offerings. When you're believing, when you're valiant, you give at least 10%. Many give a lot more than 10% of their net income, because it's again emphasized, sacrifice, building the kingdom of God. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is that people give away a big part of their retirement money, and so I consider myself lucky to have got out as early as I did. I still have, ideally, hopefully about 20 years before I retire. So the last years that I have not been paying tithing, mm, I mean, my nest egg, my retirement savings have been growing a lot faster than they did when I was in the church. So I think it is definitely a benefit. You can still find, and I still do find, other causes to support, but I think it's now I have the freedom to choose, how much and what causes I support, and I feel it's
Yeah,
there's a greater balance and greater um, satisfaction to myself to do it the way I do it now.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite things about leaving the LDS Church and not paying, 10% of my income to that organization is that now I definitely feel like I have financial room to contribute to all kinds of causes at varying levels. And so I think, like, we probably donate to 10 different organizations, and then just on a whim, it's like I will also just contribute to things that we think have value. And so, yeah, we're often making those donations, and we have the capacity to do that now. And so I really like that. That brings me a lot of satisfaction, knowing that I'm like helping with a whole bunch of different causes that will have hopefully some immediate and also long-term effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And another reason why life is better now is that I think I have a better attitude towards others. You know, like I no more have this holier than thou kind of attitude. I have no more unfounded contempt towards those that are different. Let's, for example, LGBT people or whatever. And I think I have more understanding and tolerance towards just natural and healthy variance, you know, that we observe in humanity, you know. So uh, when I was still a believing member, I remember feeling a lot of these, let's say, these feelings of contempt or superiority or and the ideas of, you know, what was proper or appropriate was very rigid. You know, there were certain limits. You know, like if someone came to church and their shirt was you know, like light pink or something, it was a big problem. These people had to be talked to. You know, why are they not respecting the Lord's Supper and blah blah blah, you know. But now I don't worry about these kinds of things. So I think this just more liberal attitude towards others and this live and let live type of attitude.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yeah, you tend to view, or I tended to view variety as, in many cases, as a threat to the proper order, the true order of things, like how it should be. And, in some way or another, that it needed to be dealt with, or at least needed to be tolerated. And your mind has kind of a flip where you sort of realize that within limits, that variety is like really important, and really such an important aspect of making life beautiful is just the fact that you have so many different people and approaches. And and that's like part, it makes life really rich to have different ways of viewing things. And yeah, it's like you definitely, I cherish and value that, whereas I think I was, it either annoyed me or it made me anxious beforehand. So yeah, it's definitely a huge thing.
Yeah, yeah. And this, I just wanted to also talk about another thing that has to do with like this more time and less anxiety and stress. And I just remembered that you know, as a Latter-day Saint, uh, the mind was always occupied with these little details, you know, that you had to take some kind of stance about because you know your behavior and your thoughts had to be very regulated. And so I remember thinking about things like, well, let's say, is non-alcoholic beer an appropriate thing to drink? You know, because it, you know, like it's technically non-alcoholic, but it might contain up to 0.5% alcohol. Then is it should I avoid it as has a very appearance of evil? You know, like and often or another one is like, okay, you know, the store clerk mistakenly gave me 20 cents more, and I never go to that store, and now I'm like 20 miles away or kilometers away from the store. Well, if I listen to the general conference, I should drive all the way back and spend like 10 euros on gas to return the 20 cents, you know, like, and your mind is always, you know, occupied with this kind of minutia like that. And you know,
Yeah.
like it's kind of like, and that's why you have scrupulosity or religious OCD, you know. So it's like and now I'm like, I wonder how, I'm just marvel how different my inner life is, that I don't spend time and you know, I don't worry about these kinds of things like well, we'll talk about morality later, but I just wanted to say that the mind is more not cluttered with these type of things, you know.
Yeah, that I think that's, if I have a critique of, or like we have one critique of the LDS perspective, is that it does seem to focus inordinately on things that don't really matter. Like somehow, and the argument is always that, well, those little things will then lead to, sort of like bigger things, right? Like you have to get those little things right. And there's I mean, there may be some truth to that, but nonetheless, it does, yeah, like the contrast is stark. And I think maybe not everybody who's LDS, but at least, yeah, for maybe you and me, it sounds like for sure, there was a lot of focus on like all these little things that probably didn't matter, but you felt like they mattered because of things like exact obedience. And well, or you would lose the worry, like, well, I'm going to lose the spirit, and then I'll fall into sin, and then I'm going to leave the church, heaven forbid, like the worst possible things that could happen. And so yeah, and now you're definitely not thinking, you don't have, yeah, you have space to sort of focus on things that just matter in proportion, or focus on things in proportion to the extent that they matter.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, we could go on with this, but I wanted to also discuss a topic that, okay, so you might be hesitant to leave the church because of what the church has given you, or the church's role in your life. Because when you think about it, the church gives you meaning, gives you purpose, community, morality, behavior standards, gives you someone to serve, gives you hope, gives you resilience, gives you source of awe, all these things. And so when I think about it, obviously you need to replace the church's role and giving you all these good things, and my message is that you can replace them. It's you'll find them outside the church and are outside of religion just as well. And so maybe if I was to start maybe from the top, so meaning and purpose, right? And so yeah, I would say that when especially like when you consciously convert to the church, then I would say in my case at least, it was because I was looking for the higher purpose, the higher meaning, and this kind of having this eternal plan and God and this afterlife and everything. It gave you the purpose. It sort of seemed to explain existence and why I'm here and why something even exists and so forth. And so it gave you this story that you could take as like as a foundation for your purpose. So but when when you no longer believe in those things, and when you have this kind of a non-theistic scientific worldview, um, I still find meaning and purpose in my life. And for example, the one universal purpose that all life in the universe has, it is to perpetuate itself, right? So I mean, it may sound banal or maybe just basic, but if you think about it, this is the universal purpose, and us as humans, as creatures with higher consciousness, um, we can draw meaning from our role as a parent, and I draw a lot of meaning, and let's say my foundational meaning from my role as a father, trying to be as good a father as possible, providing for my children the best environment, for growing and enjoying their existence. And this includes ideally a stable marriage, and so I sort of naturally transitioned into finding meaning from fatherhood, for example.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting to think that like every one of us, at least, from an evolutionary point of view, are the product of an enormous chain of organisms, and then in the past hundreds of thousands of years of humans who, despite whatever odds, somehow survived and managed to have progeny and keep the kind of chain of existence going. And so that's super satisfying. On the flip side of that, like the inverse of it, I think is also interesting, that like the vast majority of organisms have like died out on this planet. Most things don't make it. There was, so one of my favorite composers is Johann Sebastian Bach, and he had 20 children. But my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but I think I read somewhere that that they didn't actually end up producing any progeny, or like most of them died out. There's very few descendants, if any, of like Johann Sebastian Bach, even though he had like 20 children. And there's just this idea also that to some extent it's okay for life to be for its own sake, just for the experience, right? It's like, so that idea, most organisms will not have progeny, even though or that will survive into perpetuity. And so, and that's okay. It's like they were part of this existence. They took up some time and space, and it's like, what did they do? How did they flourish? They're part of the story, even if they didn't have that, weren't part of that chain. But I completely agree that there's huge meaning and purpose in transmitting values and just care and concern and resources to one's children and other people, and the less fortunate. You were talking about like looking, and maybe you're going to hit this, but the idea of meaning, well, and just like service, something like that is like, well, you have to be a little bit more proactive to do that, but it's not super hard because there are a lot of needs generally.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's not super difficult to look out and find that, as long as you're a little proactive.
Yeah, yeah, and I will talk about service later also a little bit in more depth. So, and I was also going to say that we have a number of different roles, and those roles are related to our path, in life. For example, I have a role of a husband. Um, Everyone has a role of a child, a sibling, a relative. I also have a role of a professional, a citizen. You know, I also have a role of an ex-Mormon activist, if you want to call me that. So, I mean, we can find meaning in all of those roles, in the different roles in our lives. And like, if we find something worthwhile, I mean, yeah, we have those roles. Like I want to be a good sibling. I want to be a good son. I want to be a good professional. I mean, I spend 8 to 9, sometimes 10 hours at work. Obviously, want to have meaning in what I do for living, and so there is really, if you just focus on the here and now, if you just focus on your existence on this earthly life, there's no shortage of meaning. You just have to see it, you know. So
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just the fact you just, even from a role basis, and that just reminds me. I mean, that's one of the things that like Stephen Covey focused on a lot, and people have differing opinions of him. But I think like almost everything that he wrote about and talked about in terms of finding meaning and living a fulfilling life, like virtually all of those things still apply when you're not a member of the church as when you are a member of the church.
yeah, for sure. And it's really not that hard, like if you want to be a good person, you want to have meaning. Well, like I have my parents are both alive, like maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now they will not be alive. Like, what kind of relationship do I want to have with them now while they are alive? How do I want to interact with them? Thinking about those questions, just kind of determines a little bit like what I do, how I behave, how I communicate, and yeah, it gives me meaning to do it. It's just that it's not rocket science.
Yeah. The other thought that I have a lot, because some people who are in the church particularly will criticize, they'll say, well, all of these things are kind of like temporary. Like if you're going to die, or if there is no God, then there can be no ultimate meaning. And therefore it's like, what's even the point, right? And so that's kind of the pushback. And from my perspective, though, it's like you can make the argument, well, even if you were living forever, eternally, well, so what's the point of that? Even and I think whether the content of your life is 30 years, 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, or the content of your existence is an eternity upon eternity, nonetheless, the stuff that makes it meaningful is kind of the same. It sort of has to be, if there is meaning, it has to be intrinsic on some level. And so that's kind of my argument is regardless of how long you might exist, it's like there's still things that kind of matter one way or the other, because we're conscious individuals and we care about things, and we care about how our life goes and how it goes for other people, and that's the meaning.
Yeah, I think someone has said that the prospect of mortality is really what gives meaning to life, to know that it all ends one day. And I think one of those main, let's say, theological reasons or aspects that led to my deconversion was that at some point, still as a believer, I no longer could find, let's say, that eternal life makes any sense, because it's sooner or later, when you exist eternally, you have to come to the point where the question is like, why continue? Like even if you say, well, you will be able to uh, progress eternally, but even then the question becomes, well, like, why should I as an entity, why should I as a person continue to progress eternally? Like even then you could say that, well, what is the end game then? Like, okay, there's no end game. Like, okay, so it's just so the in that sense you could say that, well, the goal is just not to cease to exist, because it's somehow daunting, it's somehow tragic. But like, I've already come to accept that, one day I'll cease to exist. And I mean, I don't see it as some kind of big tragedy. It's just the way that life goes, and I'm enjoying it while the ride continues. And so there's no I see nothing like, there's nothing that is better about eternal existence than just, one day getting, unplugged and ceasing to exist. Makes sense to me.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, but let's move on. So we talked about meaning. Let's talk about morality, because one thing that believers say, religious people say, is that, well, without God, there's no morality. Okay. So before I even get into the thoughts that I have prepared, I want to just say that even from the historical perspective, you you cannot say that God was the author of morality, or what is right or wrong, or commandments, because you know Homo sapiens was around a lot longer before the Ten Commandments were given, or the Garden of Eden took place, or whatnot. So even chronologically, historically, there had to be morality before there was religion. Religion is a later development, so even from a very just basic historic point of view. And when you think about it, there's no need for a higher being as a source of morality. It's a really elegant description why morality emerged. It's just based on basically organisms striving towards survival, putting in place some kind of unwritten rules. We both want to procreate. We want our posterity to grow up. You're not gonna kill mine. I'm not gonna kill yours. It's plain and simple. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's a thought experiment that I sometimes suggest to people is like God is all powerful, presumably. So, for a believer particularly, imagine for a moment that God was able to will himself or herself or themselves out of existence for, say, 10 minutes. And they just, for those 10 minutes, they literally did not exist. But they instructed all the principles, everything's sort of like carrying on, naturally for those 10 minutes that God doesn't exist. And the question is, at that point, does it suddenly become moral or immoral to torture babies for fun or something like that? Like, is it now okay to start, killing and hurting and other people for no good reason? Like, did it suddenly become different? Like, and then all of a sudden, when God comes back into existence, and then now it's like, oh, now it's wrong again because of God. Like, how? And I think my argument there is, like, you have this third party who is not intrinsically involved in any sort of negotiation or transaction of well-being, and that's like, morality is kind of all about that. And so I think it's sort of like injecting a third party that doesn't need to be there for us to think about the moral content of our actions, because people definitely have well-being, and the things that we do impact that well-being. And that's, like, to me, like, that's it. Like, that's the foundation. And it's, yeah, like, so is it difficult to decide what is moral? Absolutely, because everybody has different ideas about well-being. We don't understand how our actions will impact well-being exactly. And so it's a lot of it is a lot of theory and forecasting, things like that. So it's necessarily messy, but it doesn't mean that there isn't genuine moral content that's intrinsic to our existence.
Yeah. I was going to debunk your thought experience by saying that, well, if God took a 10-minute break from existence after he had already given the commandments, then it wouldn't, matter, because he had already spoken his mind. But in
Good
any
point. Yeah,
case,
he'd already structured the things.
yeah, he already
Yeah,
told us what is right and wrong. But
that's
but
right. Yeah.
but in any case, when we want to find out what is God's morality, then we still have to, when we just look at history and the development of morality and how it is different in different parts of the world and in different religions, then we can say from the start that morality is not universal. It's not unchanging. We can see that it is continually in flux and it's continually developing, right? Um, uh, so, for example, in the Bible, slavery is not condemned, right? Slavery, there are rules and regulations about slavery. It's not condemned. So the religious or Christians tend to say, well, it was the Christians who got rid of slavery, right? But they didn't get rid of it because they read it in the Bible. It was the way they interpreted the Bible, or it was like let's say extra biblical interpretation that led them to believe that slavery is wrong, but they didn't get the knowledge, or not the maybe the knowledge not the right word, but there was no clear instruction in the Bible that slavery is wrong and you shouldn't have slaves. So and it seems like even when LDS prophets say that they speak to God and God tells them what to say and what is right and so forth, then God seems to allow humans to change his morality according to what they consider right. Yeah, you can see throughout LDS history how much the morality has changed. So and it seems to depend on the generations of humans, passing away. And when an old generation passes away, then all of a sudden morality changes. All of a sudden, uh, maybe let's say, what's a good example? Well, let's say the restriction of priesthood to blacks was, or people of African descent was restricted. It was part of LDS doctrine. It was proclaimed to be LDS doctrine from General Conference even. And the older generations have passed away now. All of a sudden, the God gives the new revelation. It's no longer part of his teaching or his eternal doctrine. And now the LDS Church's official position is that it was never doctrine. It was always just ideas of men. But if you go back and look at the historic record, then it was proclaimed to be doctrine. So
yeah, no, that and to me it's interesting because I see sort of a secular humanist and the religionist always accusing the other of being the more relative with their morality. That sort of like religion, it's just like, well, whatever God says is right, and therefore like in some ways that's a very relative view of morality. There's no strong grounding there. And then same, but I say, from a secular humanist kind of perspective, we would say, well, yeah, there's an aspect of, there's some relative aspects to morality. I think there are aspects of morality that are universal, at least to the human condition, but but there are aspects which are not nearly as sort of like set in stone, for sure. At least within LDS doctrine, the statement that is criticized a lot for being morally relativistic is this one from Joseph Smith, where he said, this is in the Happiness Letter, where he was trying to convince Nancy Rigdon to be a polygamous wife of his. At least that's the common attribution. He said, that which is wrong under one circumstance may be and often is right under another. God said, thou shalt not kill. At another time, he said, thou shalt utterly destroy. This is the principle on which the government of heaven is conducted, by revelation adapted to the circumstances in which the children of the kingdom are placed. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is. And this is sort of what most critics of the of the LDS faith, or this statement, that's where they sort of stop and they say, hey, look, that looks very relative. Because it's just whatever God says is right, and like that's it. The statement continues, though, and this is the part where I actually think that we can find common ground. The statement continues, although we may not see the reason thereof till long after the events transpire. And the idea, I think, embedded in that is that that God does have a reason for what, it's not just like capricious. So within the LDS theology, it's not merely because God just is like, he's, capriciously dictating and we have to follow it, but he also is beholden to principle and to some optimization function. which you could argue is like to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. And like that's kind of what he, within certain bounds, that defines what he considers to be right. But there is a reason for it. And I would say that like similarly, we have similar ideas, like as an ex-member of the church, is like, well, there are reasons for thinking certain things are wrong and certain things are right. It's not just completely capricious and completely relative.
Yes, but I tend to think that Joseph might have had his reproductive organ doing the talking there, rather than some theological higher principle.
Maybe.
In any case, let's not linger on that. But if I was to say, well, what is the basis of morality? I would say that our best scientifically educated understanding of what is good for individuals and groups could be easily. And I would say that perhaps it's observable that that's what is the basis of morality, is whatever, empirically tends to play out, best. And I think we should strive for improvement in well-being in the human condition, and not only human condition, but I think more and more us as humans, we will, and humanity as a whole will take into consideration all sentient life, and all, higher creatures. I know there are a lot of let's say internal conflicts there maybe, and like how do you actually then prioritize the well-being of different organisms, but when the well-being comes at odds in situations. But I think it is more and more considered. We can see in the developed West, for example, let's say the fur coats are no longer really as accepted as they used to be, and this kind of industrial farming is being criticized more and more, and so forth. So animal well-being, I think, is going to continue to be a topic of prominence in the future.
Yeah, I think from religious, or at least a Judeo-Christian perspective, it's almost like the only reason somebody might worry about animal welfare is because God gave Adam and Eve that stewardship. And from my perspective now, it's just, well, it's intrinsic that to conscious creatures have an experience, and if we can contemplate what that might be like, then we have some responsibility to consider our impact, the impact of our actions. And so, yeah, like I totally agree that like the scope of my kind of moral concern has broadened since I left the LDS faith to include like animal consciousness.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I mean, I have come to believe that particular applications of morality, they're subject to change, obviously, and I don't think that they're even necessarily universal across cultures. But it seems that certain attitudes and approaches seem to emerge as most optimal for well-being, like, for example, respect of free will and respect of fruits of labor, so like private ownership. So also equality of opportunity, for example, education. Higher education in Estonia, for example, is free. Uh, uh, Application for jobs and qualification for jobs should not be unreasonably discriminating towards any kinds of groups or whatever. So like we should not discriminate people based on their color or sexual orientation when we're talking about, or gender when we're talking about who gets the job. So, and of course, care for those who are least well off, who are not able to take care of themselves. I think it's a moral question again, society is able to do it. We don't need any commandment from on high to do it. We just need to be able to empathize and realize that, you know, they're also sentient beings. They're also, you know, so again, another optimal, I think, arrangement of society seems to be specialization of labor, peace rather than war. Obviously, we see what's going on in Ukraine. We see the footage. We know that it's not optimal for well-being. You know, we know that this kind of activity, murdering, killing, genocide, raping, you know, we know that it's not conducive to human well-being. We know it's not moral. So I would say that in deciding what is the moral right thing to do, I've come to just not look for the scriptures for what is the right thing to do or what the prophets have said, but I just ask myself, you know, is it hurting anyone? Is it helping anyone? Or how is it hurting? How is it helping? And what is my duty and priority and allegiance? You know, what should I be doing? I also think sometimes about, you know, when I have uh, choices to make, like what is the greater evil? Because sometimes you tend to be, it seems like you have to choose between two evils, and then you have to think what is the greater evil. I tend to think about what does the science say, and well, what does science say? There's no does science, but you know, what does science say? And also I consider like what is acceptable in my culture, within my culture, because we all live in our cultures, and this can educate our decisions about, you know, what to do. So yeah, I mean, these kinds of questions pretty much tend to keep you out of trouble. So
Yeah, and this is one of this is both a privilege and a burden of being, I think, a former member, is that when we talk about like the cycles or like what we're worried about, I would say like I'm concerned about these bigger picture questions of the impact of my actions and what is the correct course of action, say, within my family and within my job, in my community, for our nation, like what, and like those are the things that that concern me now, and it does require a lot of resources, I would say, to be informed, because I guess that's the main thing, is like there is no foregone conclusion, like it's not already been decided, and so I very much sense that I could be wrong on almost any of my positions. And so I want to make sure that I'm informed and have thought through these things, and that I've heard a lot of different perspectives. So that, I mean, a good example of this is just dealing with abortion, a very difficult moral topic. And this is one that like I'm still like, it's been 7 years since I left the LDS faith. The LDS church has a fairly well structured sense for like what they consider moral, and I think it's just extremely difficult and complex. And so like I haven't completely resolved my sense for what is exactly the right approach between society and individually and everything. It's like a really tough issue.
yeah, for sure. But I think again, even in this question, I think uh, what has elucidated the subject is science. You know, like we know more about fetal development. We know about the actual, let's say, physics of abortion, and so I mean, if you don't have scientific development like helps you have better discussions also, like at some point if you're just going on based on like just philosophizing or what one person thinks and what another person thinks, I think we have to come, it has to, these kind of difficult topics, the more science can elucidate the subject matter, the better the better decisions can be made, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that also, I would say, it's similar to an issue like transgenderism, and how this sort of like what accommodations and how should we deal with that as a society. And it's one of those things where it's nice to be able to look at the science and have that inform your stance on it, versus say like a dogma of well, gender is an eternal characteristic, and versus, hey, the science is actually quite messy on this, is like, both in terms of hormone penetration. So with something like complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, where a person will have XY chromosomes, but then they have that, like the testosterone and the androgens had no penetrance and effect on their development, and so they will develop with breasts and things like that. Anyway, so biologically very confusing and difficult to understand. And then also the research that deals with the independent psychological development, and how that's also under hormonal control, which can vary at different points in time during fetal development. And so because like understanding the biological basis for these different phenomena allow us to have some better compassion, and hopefully to make the right calls as a society and as individuals in accommodating and respecting and appreciating just the other people and the variety of life and the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had 2 points about morality, which we both now discussed. Is that, first of all, you need freedom, and you have freedom to experiment and to test things out and to see what seems right. They're both on the let's say the societal level and on the individual level and family level. There's no cookie cutter solutions. You have people in the broader world. There are all sorts of different solutions that work out. So and open communication and care for others also is important. And this scientific science itself is based on open communication and everyone's right to weigh in and bring new data and new evidence. So this but also in your family relationships, when you want to have everyone have the greatest well-being, then you need open communication. There's no top down. I mean, obviously parents have to put in place, or let's say based on their greater experience and life wisdom, they sometimes may apply some kind of rules in the home. But in general, you want to communicate openly, and explanation and such, and discussion should be the basis of deciding what is true. I mean, what is good, what is right, what is moral, what is ethical. So the big change for me is that I no longer feel this kind of anxiety of trying to be perfect in the eyes of God, and so there's much more peace, and so this kind of, yeah. Also, I want to say that I think that in the LDS Church, one of those things that was said often was that like if it's like with movies, for example, like PG-13, rated R, it was like this, like if it's something that a 10-year-old shouldn't watch, then an adult shouldn't watch it either. There's just like one size fits all. I would say that it's absolutely normal and okay to have like children and different levels of, let's say, discussions and even depictions of things that where morality is questionable, because it might educate us about something, or like so. And I think also tailoring your behavior to audience and circumstances is quite appropriate. Of course, there you have to have some kind of reasonable boundaries. But for example, I use some kind of certain language with my children, but then at work, when I want to get something across with the appropriate or proper, let's say, feeling and so that the people, the employees understand the importance of the topic. Like I sometimes I might swear at work, just to drive the point home, that but you have to still, let's say, monitor yourself, and I think that you can differentiate the message to different audiences, and it doesn't make me some kind of immoral monster when I say shit at work or something like that, or I'm not gonna stand for this shit or whatever, like it's not like it doesn't make you some kind of monster, you have to, or like the whatever, saying the F word or whatever, like I'm not gonna say it in front of my kids, but sometimes it's appropriate at work to get some point across to use a little bit stronger language,
Yeah, yeah, that is. I love the color and the richness of language that's now accessible to me. And like, yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and it's quite useful for emphasis, right? Like it's the way that most adults, most human adults, like communicate is, with an occasional emphasis, occasionally done through, certain words. And yeah, but yeah, I mean, and of course, there's a time. That's what I tell my children. It's like, the issue is that you should swear appropriately. And like, that's kind of it's like there's a time and a place, and it should be, well done, and not excessive. And like, that's, and of course there, um, that's all kind of cultural based, but still, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
And it's about being authentic, and like having your style. And I have people at work who have been atheists, or not atheists maybe, but let's say non-religious their entire lives, and they never swear. This is the way they were brought up. And I think that, and then let's say then there are maybe some blue collar workers or whatever who every other word they say they swear. Like it's a different kind of backgrounds and stuff. Um, and then I use it for color, getting, like, emphasizing or getting a point across, or having people understand the the importance, or the the seriousness of the situation. Maybe sometimes, we're fucked or something, like when we do that, like. But I don't go, but I don't go and say it like 10 times a day, like.
But it has, yeah, like, just, I mean, as you say it like that, though, it like really, conveys the message in a way that it's dubious whether it could be conveyed in any other way. I mean, obviously English is extremely, supple, language, and all the languages, but yeah, it's just a part of the human condition and experience. And it is, yeah, I think it's one of the funnest things, to be able to do in the right time and context.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and so obviously, like things that are denounced in the LDS Church, and also in other religions, such as alcohol or coffee, or even other drugs, psychedelics. I mean, when they're legal, there can be a time and place, and in moderation, and stuff that they can contribute to greater well-being. But you have to be smart about those, and um, yeah, you don't have to indulge them for the sake of indulgence. I mean, and you're application that say can change throughout life, and there are no like rules that okay, you when there's party I have to drink or I don't have to. It's like you have freedom to decide what you want to do. At some parties I want to maybe drink, at others I don't, or like, so it's basically, but they can enhance the like they can enhance the occasion or the atmosphere or well-being, like I think this has been my experience now. So
Yeah, that's another area. Like in some ways, I guess a theme here is that, um, well, from a secular perspective, that within the LDS Church, there's some infantilization or some uh, what's the right word? It's tardy, like so delayed maturation. And when you leave the LDS Church, you're sort of exposed then to the whole gamut of sort of like adult options and adult ways of being. And we call them, adult. It's like, I mean, I don't know if it's just sort of like a different swath, different things with greater consequence. And so, and that's like, so like that, like when you're talking about mind altering substances and things like that, like, yeah, like you're dealing with things that potentially have serious consequences. Nobody should drink and drive ever. People should, be careful about when and where and how they consume drugs and how much or whatever it is. Like those are, because there is such a potency there. But it is nice to have access. And I would say, most of anybody who's read like Michael Pollan's books or things like that, most of humanity has been existed in concert with, in some conversation with mind altering substances. And so it's that's another area where it's nice to be able to have those options of exploring that space. I think it is interesting. So I've been formally resigned for 7 years, sort of like out for 8-ish, and I still to this day have not done any cannabis or weed. I still haven't done any like psilocybin or LSD or anything like that. I have tried, alcohol at different moments, and I occasionally will, drink alcohol socially, very much in moderation. I've been drunk one time in 7 years, like, so it's but that's what, like, but I kind of reserve the right to explore those things when I want to, or when I feel like it. And also I would say, for people, since we've kind of been talking, some of our audience is people who might be considering leaving or on the edge of leaving. And that is that, you don't have to do, like, if alcohol isn't your thing, if you're worried about, maybe a family history of substance abuse or things like that, then it's perfectly fine to not do alcohol, or it's perfectly fine to do a little of it, or it's perfectly fine to responsibly incorporate it into your life, and that's okay. Like all of those are fair options. And so it's just been interesting to me to see different ex-Mormon friends who have all adopted slightly different stances at different times, even at different times in their life, to alcohol or drugs on some level. But as far as I'm aware, all of them have done it in a responsible manner, right? Like, so to date, and it's been, so we have at least a little bit of a track record now. None of them are alcoholics. None of them are, sort of like druggies, addicted to anything. And so I would say, like, yeah, so everybody was capable, at least for 8 years or so, of, having a healthy adult relationship with mind altering substances. So
yeah,
I think
for sure.
that's a good thing, like you can do it. And for some people, it's not just something that they enjoy, they don't do very much,
Yeah,
and that's fine, and like, that's not a problem. And yeah, so like I don't really like alcohol very much, and so I just don't drink it very often. But I think it's fun to be part of, also engaged in some of those social situations, and I'm happy to have a little bit and enjoy some of it.
yeah, and of course, just again about these mind-altering substances is and alcohol is that I think the best rule is always to be very educated about it, to know about it, like what kind of consequences it has, and so forth. And the other thing is to also like understand that different people react differently. Like when I drank alcohol first, like when I was like 15 or something, like and then up to when I joined the church at age 20. You know, my relationship with alcohol was different than it is now. You know, that I'm like 43, 44. My position, my socioeconomic situation, my brain development, it's a totally different thing. I react to alcohol and under the influence very differently. You know, it doesn't alcohol does not turn me into some kind of wild animal anymore. You know, like so it's different. Like there's no like obviously, you know, it is in certain quantities. Alcohol can be poisonous and detrimental to your health, and you just have to know it and yeah, just be moderate.
Yeah, and so one of the things I've been really surprised about, at least especially from an LDS perspective, is that like, so I've raised most of my children now have been raised outside of the LDS church for the most part, almost all of them. So I have 3 adult children at this point, older than 18. None of them have chosen to, and some above the drinking age, and none of them have chosen to like incorporate alcohol or drugs you know, as a regular part of their life. So and essentially almost everybody's like, hey, I'll just postpone that until I'm 25, you know, any sort of like regular or significant consumption of it. And so that to me is like, I think like, you know, you have this conception that everybody's just going to go off the deep end. If you could, like, if you could, wouldn't you just get drunk all the time or do something like this? And the answer is not necessarily. And in this case, like maybe not, right? Like, so if, you know, you're worried about how you're developing and you're trying to live a good, responsible life, and you know you can, but you don't have to, there's no rush, then it may be something that you postpone or you explore later on. And so, yeah, I found that quite interesting that none of my children have really like, you know, consumed much, if any, alcohol. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of fun, kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think there was a recent study that showed something like basically that yeah, the later you start consuming alcohol, the better for you. But that let's say the detrimental effects tend to diminish as you age. But of course, I think it's a really good policy or attitude to have is that, you know, when you're young, 20s, 30s even, you stay away from alcohol or, you know, keep it to the minimum. And later on in life also, you have to, I mean, you will feel it when you've had too much to drink, you know, it's just you don't feel good the next day. And yeah, so basically you have to be smart about it. And I think us as people, we are so capable of let's say being the authors of our own experiences that, you know, like if I put my mind to it and I have a mindset, then I can derive the same level of enjoyment from one glass of wine that I do, you know, just getting really drunk. You know, like it's like I have to have certain approach and certain expectations towards the experience that I will have. And so like the limit of how much I consume can also be, you know, integrated into that expectation. So just saying.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And just that, I think it's, that nuance is great and not something I would have expected, right? Like that's not or that doesn't feel like the expectation from within the religious worldview.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so that's it basically about morality. There can be more, of course, to discuss, but I think we covered most of it. So another thing that probably, if you consider leaving the church, you might be worried about is like, will I be happy? Because there's in the church they talk about the plan of happiness, and there is this what they call what's it called? This kind of like countenance is shining or whatever. Like they talk about this happy countenance and things. Um, so my experience after church has been that I'm still as happy. I mean, I have still similar moments where I'm totally overcome by happiness. Overcome by the spirit. I just now have a naturalistic explanation to what's happening in my body. Yeah, happiness is like it's an attitude. It's how I approach life, and it's nothing to do with believing in certain metaphysical things or something. Like, it's happiness is an attitude, and the other thing is science studies happiness. We can study the findings and apply the findings in our lives, and so we can learn to be happy. And so yeah, uh, there's been no drop in happiness for me after leaving the church. And I think also there have been studies that show that like, people, even after tragedies and things, people tend to, after a while, go back to their former levels of happiness. So so I think that happiness is you can learn to be happy and have this happy attitude, and it's all of these mindsets and skills are available to you after you leave the church. So you can be the master
Yeah,
of your own happiness.
yeah, that's right. I love that way of thinking about it, because yeah, happiness isn't something really, and this remains true in and out of the church, is that happiness is not something that happens to you. It's sort of how it is defined more by your approach to life. And I would say that's right. Like, scientifically, there's a course from Yale all about happiness. I think it's public. I think anybody can take it. I could be wrong, or aspects of it. But the sorts of things that are very well studied and understood by science that contribute to happiness are exercise, sleep, gratitude, serving others, community. It's like, so doing those things that contribute. So if you're not feeling great, barring some like chemical imbalances or things like that, then like there are ways. Yeah, it's like, if you do the things to be happy, then you'll feel occasionally, you'll feel that joy and that happiness. One of the things that was very interesting to me was talking with different siblings and friends about their happiness level before and after. So we actually got down and like gave numbers about like how happy we felt within the church and outside of the church. An interesting pattern emerged from that, and that was that all of the male friends or family that I had felt like they were roughly the same happy within and inside and outside of the church. Like, certain aspects were better or worse, but their overall level of happiness remained about the same. All of my female friends and family who had left the church were dramatically more happy. Like, it was so like double in whatever their previous happiness score was. Almost all of them, it had doubled in the
Hmm.
way, and like, so they're much happier. I think in that way, like, we sometimes forget the sort of like the burdens of the kind of latent misogyny and being within a patriarchal system where their voices really aren't given the same weight, and where they shoulder a lot of the heavy responsibilities. And so just being able to sort of like self-actuate, self-express, and share some of the burdens of parenting and things a little bit more equitably really has can make a huge difference for some people. And I would say not everybody. And there are some people who left the LDS faith and who I think have not felt as happy for various reasons. So it's not, I don't think it's a universal, but for the most part, it seems like people are at least roughly the same happy. That's been my kind of experience.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So happiness definitely there's no drop off there. I mean, I think maybe the only it's rather just coping with change and making sure you find these replacements to those things that you need. Um, then serving and contributing to others. This is like a big part of the church, and um, I would say that this one I think has a lot to do like with the story that you tell yourself in your head, because like um, if the church has this kind of a formal structure about what service means. It means serving in the church, serving in your family, and then I don't know, basically, yeah, like any kind of Christian service. But that's also mostly done through, well, being a good neighbor, and then through these church programs like home teaching and I don't know, service projects and stuff like that. But yeah, so I would say that again, um, after you leave the church, you're still free to choose, and you can, I mean, you will still be able to choose in many of the same serve in many of the same ways that you served in the church. Um, Obviously, you don't have a calling anymore, and so there's a difference in that. Like, I don't get to give a speech to like 100 people every month or every week, or teach a class, those opportunities. I mean, they still can be there. You can find some kind of interest group or whatever, or hobby group, and be an instructor if you want. But for me, it's more like I just maybe have uh, changed the way I view my activities, and just like I see that everything I do really is service. And for example, uh, like how do you rate, or how do you judge my service as a professional, as an employee, as an executive, where I lead a team. I make sure that our company of 50 people stays in business. We pay a lot of taxes to the government. I pay a lot of taxes to the government. It's being used to help this country function, all the social welfare programs, education, medicine, pensions, everything. Like, what I do is also service to others, and like my taxes that I pay. Um, when you're with your kids, when you're just being a good father, when you're being a good husband, you know, it it's it is service. This is like, what else do you need to do in life? In the church, I always felt like there was some kind of expectation, or some kind of time where I had to go out of the home and run around in the world and help the wider world. But I don't know, I just don't feel any need for that. Like, just my roles that I fill them well, just being a good neighbor, having a friendly chat with the neighbor. The other day, a neighbor helped me with he has this kind of little tractor, this little thing that, this little machine, the tractor that he can push the snow with. He helped clear my driveway a little bit. I mean, our street is like Zion here, like, and no one is religious, or, like you don't have to have this kind of artificial religious superstructure to or ideology to help one another and serve one another. And you just have to see, like, and just maybe analyze, or like what perhaps my daily activities are also service, helping clean up the room or helping cook for my children or for my family, or like doing my own laundry and not asking my wife to do it. Is that not service? Like, you just have to maybe just kind of think uh, more broadly and not be so tethered to one specific idea about what is service.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. I completely agree that like the way you view, yeah, I mean, like service in some ways feels, or it can feel like it's like artificial or it's separate from life. And I know it doesn't always, like sometimes, I mean, there's sort of like two views within the LDS church, and one of them kind of fits, I think, what you're talking about is like almost everything that you're doing to be kind, to love others, to help others, like that is service also. And then you have like service projects, and like that's a very specific sort of thing that you do. And I think I probably don't do as many service projects, but I am just as conscientious to serve and help generally. Like a good example of that, just like you're saying with like getting rid of snow and stuff like that. One of my sons, there was a snowstorm, and he went and he shoveled the driveway of one of the older neighborly ladies and or older neighbors. And we've done that, lots of times. We're not the only ones. There's other neighbors who help out too. It's like, different people pitch in different ways, and other neighbors help out, of course, us when we've been, in times of need, and we really appreciate that. And but yeah, it's so there's kind of like there's opportunities all around. And whereas and then there's some parallels where before I would consider like my time to prepare for like a lesson and give it an elders quorum or something like that. And like that was, I viewed that as sort of like a spiritual service. Whereas now, like going online, maybe making a post that is thoughtful or trying to find some insight, I view that as a similar type of thing where I'm like hopefully enriching somebody's life by taking the time to be thoughtful and sharing my observations or perspective. And it's like a similar sort of thing and a similar level of satisfaction.
Exactly, and you're not burdened by this constant thought that, am I doing enough in the eyes of God? And like, there's no afterlife, there's no God, there are no rewards or punishments. All you do is what you consider is right, and let's say what seems to increase well-being. So all right, so yeah, and then maybe the last thing, and then we should probably conclude, is this, this source of wonder or awe, like some say, like when they think about, how God has created everything, and how good is God for us, that he, I don't know, sent his son to save us from sins and such. So maybe you're afraid that when you leave the church, you have this, you no longer have a source of wonder and awe in life. But I would say, again, you do not need this supernatural creator to marvel at the beauty of the universe. I mean, the universe is just as beautiful with or without the creator. And I would even say that when you study the science and find out more about the science and marvel how much more we know about science now, that we that let's say the scientific method and the secular worldview has helped us find out about the universe. I would say that the more at awe I am about the universe and how beautiful, complicated, and robust it is, that we are able to live and thrive here. And um, yeah, like there's no like difference. Like when President Nelson says that He as a doctor marvels at how perfect God has made the human body. Well, I would say, well, I also marvel at how billions of years of evolution have made the human body so perfect and resilient and whatnot. So yeah, there's no lack of awe and marvel without the church or without the supernatural. Yeah.
Yeah, just totally agree. There's the similar types of things and sometimes new things, but mostly the same types of things that yeah, brought me that great grand sense of awe are the same things now. Like the vistas and the sunrises and the sunsets, snow, like all those types of things are just still just as magnificent and wonderful to me now. Finding like really beautiful music. I've been listening to some works by Max Richter lately, and just like really struck by how beautiful they are. They really strike a chord with me emotionally, and it's yeah. So it's the and I guess what we're kind of trying to say is that many of the same um, dynamics of our lives from before and after are similar, and that like some of the things that you worry that you might lose because they felt locked into a religious worldview, you find out that they're not necessarily tied intrinsically to the religious view, that they have kind of a life of their own outside of that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so maybe my final thought would be that maybe what is holding you back from let's say uh, leaving the church is this idea that well, I'm not stupid. The church is full of intelligent people. How come I was duped and I couldn't see it? And just kind of this kind of denial then also can also stop from progressing or taking the next step. Then I want to uh, echo what this New Testament scholar, what's his name, Richard Carrier, I think Richard is his first name. Anyway, last name is Carrier. I listened to a podcast recently, and he made a good point that religious people are not unintelligent or stupid. They're not less intelligent than non-religious people or atheistic people. They're just as smart. The difference is the epistemology that you apply to finding out, you know, what is true and how the world works and what is reality. So I think most religious people and LDS people are more than capable to understand and apply the scientific method and let's say the naturalistic epistemology in their life. Uh, it's just that psychologically we are very, like we discussed before a year ago, that there are many psychological tendencies that keep us from making big changes in our life, like like this things like confirmation bias and so forth. So but that's maybe my final thought, that religious people are just as intelligent, just as smart, just as good. But maybe I would just suggest to really study the epistemology and like how do you think and how do you decide what is true and what is reality. So
Yeah, I agree. It's the yeah questioning. How is it that we know what we know is like it's useful. I would say regardless of where that takes a person. I have no problems. If the LDS faith is bringing joy and to a person's life, and they have ways to sort of mitigate the different harms within it. Like I wish them all the best in within that structure. But yeah, so I think like questioning, deeply questioning how we know things and why we know things is useful regardless of where you land, and if it brings a person outside of the church, I think we've kind of discussed it, like that's not such a bad thing. If you remain in the church and just have a more solid epistemology, or have dug deeper into why into what you know and what you don't know, then you're going to be so much the better off for having done that type of thing. So I do think that exploring, critiquing is useful to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this could go on for a lot longer, but I think this is good enough now. So thank you very much, Jon, and I hope that the people who will listen will also enjoy this. And thanks a lot. Talk to you another time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Kennet.
All right.